right, good morning, everyone. Jen, do you want to?
Oh, good morning. Thank you for coming. Seems like we're starting a new adventure after the state board hearing, but it's really a continuing of the same journey we've been on. So I appreciate you all attending today, and we'll give you updates on everything that's happening in both subbasins, and then move right into the allocation policy discussion.
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. I don't know if I know everybody on the call, so I'm Americ Hussein. I'm with Geosyntec Consultants. We are the engineering consultants helping support Tri-County on the SGMA efforts. We're also working with Tri-County on the Tulare Lake site as well, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about both.
Maybe because we have a room full today and people online, let's do introductions today. We haven't done that in a long time, so I'll start. I'm Deanna Jackson. I'm the Executive Director for Tri-County Water Authority. I think I know everybody on the call, but I think it'd be great. We'll start in the room and then we'll go online. So to my left.
All right, I'm Johnny Haley. I'm the South Fork Kings GSA.
Brandon Spain, stakeholder in Fair County.
Myron Scotanis, farm down in the Southeast Management area.
Jay Tabelli, landowner, Tri-Counties.
Sebastian Silvera, here for a landowner.
Stacey Wilkins, Administrative Assistant here at Tri-County.
You want to call on people?
Sure. Susan, we'll start with you.
Susan Long, Executive Director of Tule Basin Land and Water Conservation Trust.
Okay. Kathy?
Kathy Wood McLaughlin. I'm a consultant for Tri-County, and I'm also a board member on the Tule Land and Water Conservation Trust.
Okay. Oscar?
Go. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Oscar. Yes.
Hi, my name is Oscar. I'm a senior water resource analyst at One of Four Orchards.
Great, thanks.
Julie?
Yes, good morning. I'm Julie Allen. I'm president of the Graham Osborne Ditch Company, among a number of different hats over the years.
Welcome, Julie. It's been a while.
It has been a while. It's great to be back.
Good to see you.
Gabe?
Morning, everybody. Gabe Gibbons, 33 Solutions out of Visalia.
Mantra?
Hi, I'm Montserrat Solis. I'm a reporter for SJV Water.
Perfect. Okay. Tacoa?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Takoa Kadara out of Allensworth, working with the Allensworth Progressive Association.
Perfect. Stacey Ann?
Hi, all. Stacey Ann Silva with Ultima Aqualogic, private consultant, working on the behalf of some landowners in Tri-County.
Okay, and Rachel?
Good morning, everyone. Rachel Clement with the Office of Congressman David Valadao.
Perfect. Okay, I think I got everybody.
Well, again, welcome, everybody. Thank you for attending today.
So I'm going to just get started on the agenda, just jump right in and give you an update on Tulare Lake. So as you're all most probably well aware of, what was it, almost 2 weeks ago, the judge in the lawsuit with the Farm Bureau had filed against the state, put in a preliminary injunction, and that was on a Friday. The following Monday, we walked in and we got a notice from the State Water Resources Control Board staff saying, based on that preliminary injunction, they had been directed not to communicate with us. And so we had several meetings scheduled to talk about the draft Tulare Lake GSP that had been submitted to them. They had reviewed it. They gave us some initial feedback on just water levels, but we were obviously hoping to get feedback on water quality as well as subsidence. And they essentially canceled that scheduled meeting and told us that they would not be scheduling any more with us. subsequent to that, the GSA managers all got together, and made a decision that we were going to then approach the state through their legal, state board, through the attorney that's been assigned to our case, and determine, hey, exactly what's going on, what can we do. The GSAs are not party to the lawsuit, so we felt that this was an extreme interpretation of what the judge had asked for. Separate from that, we were also going to approach the folks that had filed the lawsuit, the Farm Bureau and their attorney, and ask them if necessary, we need to ask the judge to maybe amend or adjust that injunction so that we could continue our discussions with the state, so we can continue to get the information we need to finalize the document and get it submitted. The deadline is April of 2025, and our plan is to get that document submitted way before then. Obviously, that was the plan, and have it approved and get everybody out of probation as quickly as possible. Excuse me. But we've hit a definite hiccup, and I don't think that was the intent of the judge. I don't think that was the intent of the lawsuit at all. I think this is the state interpreting it in a extreme manner.
I'll just add, for Tulare Lake for Tri-County, again, we only have a little over 4,000 acres in Tulare Lake that's in production, but we do want to include with what we submit back to the state our new allocation plan. I think it's very important. If we don't have our plan of action included in the document, we likely will not get the good actor provision, which is what we're probably going to still be shooting for in April. I mean, I hope that's not the case, but it's likely that, others may not be where we are in April in the Tulare Lake subbasin. So again, that's why we're working on an allocation policy. Separating the subbasins is something the state has been very clear about as far as allocation policy, and so Tulare Lake will have an allocation policy that is particular to Tulare Lake.
Questions? Johnny or Stacy Ann, did you guys want to add anything to any of the discussions?
Nothing for me.
Not really. Okay, so our plan right now in Tulare Lake, as far as Tri-County is concerned, is still to submit the document by that December timeline. That gives the state 4 months essentially to review the document. And Deanna's right. I'm going to get into the Tule subbasin hearing in a second, but it was very clear that the state now has at least a process, or at least they've granted some people some reprieves on the probationary expenses and fees and things of that nature, and metering requirements. So it is our intention to ask for a good actor provision for Tri-County in Tulare Lake. And we've never been shy about telling the state that. They are well aware of that. Okay, the Tule subbasin. Obviously, I'm sure, in fact, I'm looking at the list of people on the call, and many of you were either in person in Sacramento last Tuesday or Tuesday of last week, or, were on the call. Bottom line is the Tule subbasin was placed on probation. Both Delano Early Mart and Kern Tulare were exempt from having to pay fees or do the metering requirements and reporting. The state felt that they were both sustainable and therefore could be exempted from that. Pixley and Lower Tule also presented a plan for subsidence, a subsidence management plan. Many of you are familiar with that. That's the grid pattern that you've seen on some of their presentations. And it was very clear that the state had a very positive reaction to that. Not just, it wasn't so much the grid, but the fact that their management plan called for specific actions when certain thresholds, and there were automatic triggers to take certain actions. And I think it being in the room, it was very clear that they had a very positive response to that. So that is going to be part of the discussion moving forward for Tri-County as well. Right now, we had a meeting, Deanna and I had a meeting yesterday. Do you want to kind of elaborate on yesterday's meeting a little bit, or with the subbasin as a whole?
Oh, sure. Which meeting did we have? No, sorry. No, we did, yesterday was the first time the Tule subbasin managers had, gotten together again since the probationary designation. The facilitator that the Department of Water Resources has dedicated to the Tule subbasin was in person at that meeting. And we really took that opportunity, she took that opportunity to make sure we had action items as we move forward. So we went through a number of things that still have to be accomplished in the Tule subbasin, assigned those action items to who needed to accomplish them. And so we're moving through those action items. You want to list kind of what those involved? They were everything from completion of the mitigation plan to areas that still have need resolution between the areas. All of those action items were included. We're still missing the completed mitigation plan, the completed coordination agreement. Any other key documents we're still completing?
No, I think
those are the two key documents that we're still completing.
Yeah. I think the two issues, though, that really came out of that meeting, as Deanna already said, it's the mitigation plan and specifically how we're going to fund it. And this is on a basin-wide level. And so I think those are going to be the primary discussions moving forward. And then the second thing that pertains to Tri-County was a subsidence study along the Delano-Early-Mart CID border. And we would be involved in scoping that along with Tom Harder as well as Delano's consultants, which is a firm called Intera. And that scope of work has not yet been determined, and that's going to be an ongoing discussion and something that we're very closely involved with. And there were a few other issues that need to be sorted out, but those were the two main, I think, that affect this group.
Was that the mitigation for subsidence, or was that mitigation for wells?
It's mitigation for both subsidence, water, well, all three water levels, so wells going dry, and then any water quality impacts as well.
No subsidence.
And subsidence, yeah, and subsidence, yeah. It definitely covers all three, and as you can imagine, those of you that were in the hearing, there was a pretty expansive interpretation by at least one of the state board members on what needs to be covered, and the feeling was that get out there and cover impacts, and they want, or that individual wanted to see very few limits on what we would cover, but those are ongoing discussions with the rest of
Because we kind of have our water well mitigation deal in place, right?
We have the one that we adopted January of 24. Was it 24?
Yeah.
Or was it 23? I think it's 24.
Yeah.
And but this mitigation plan is a subbasin-wide mitigation plan, except for Delano-Early-Mart. So every other GSA has indicated they will sign on to this mitigation plan. It's more robust, and it includes subsidence. But we have an agreement in place currently that we've already approved with Self-Help Enterprises. So if we had a domestic well issue, currently that claim would go to Self-Help Enterprises. Self-Help would do the initial investigation. If they needed emergency water supply, Self-Help would provide that, and we would reimburse them. And that's already in place. And we would go through our current process, and if it was a well that has gone dry due to groundwater level declines, we would do that investigation and potentially replace that well. But the one that's gonna be sub-basin wide is more robust than that and deals, with water quality issues as well as water level decline. So that is, it's very close, I think, to being completed for domestic wells. My suggestion to the group yesterday was not to hold that up on subsidence mitigation, that we can do that as a subsequent as we work through the issues with subsidence mitigation, which is much more complex than domestic well mitigation, and that we should go ahead and put that mitigation document in place for domestics, and then work out the subsidence issues that are kind of ongoing, particularly with the pipeline study and other things that are going to take some time. We don't want to hold up the domestic well portion of that, I don't believe, for the sub-basin, while we're working through those issues, so.
So any well that might be impacted by subsidence, if there was a municipal well, for example, at a community that was impacted by subsidence, that would be covered, under the well portion of it. But it was also about levees and canals and things of that nature that were, that still need to be ironed out and discussed fully with the group. Excuse me. So those are going to be some of the key things that we're going to be focused in on, and both of those, the mitigation plan as well as the study, are going to be brought back to this group as well, so that, we'll keep you informed on what's going on and what the actual scope of work is going to be for both of those. The other item for the Tule sub-basin is the Allensworth project. We had a meeting, Deanna and I met with the Angela Water District on Monday. Yeah, feels like a million years ago now. On Monday, and we presented a 30% design to them on what the basin would look like. We talked about some of the other land uses and what kind of commitments that Angela would have to have and agreements that they'd have to have. So, for example, the wastewater treatment plant that's also planned for those properties. Since it's Angela's property, we are also going to be making a full presentation to their board on the 17th as well, and asking their board for some approvals and other things. I will say the unfortunate reality is that the basin has gotten smaller because we looked at what we can afford, and so we've had to shrink the basin down quite a bit. But we've set aside other lands for phase 2, which, if we're looking for additional funds, we can build, and that is to capture White River, the floodwater that comes down the White River. And as many of you on this call know, that water comes in only when there's, those flood events, and it comes in fast for a very short amount of time, and we've got to capture what we can capture, and it does come in with a bunch of sediment too. So we want to alleviate flooding for the community, but we also want to capture this water as much as we can. It's based on Angela's water right to their paperwork that they've submitted for a water on the river. Okay, I'm going to keep going. The Tule Trust update. Susan, if you've got any Tule Trust update for the group.
The biggest update that we have right now is we do have the land fallowing program is up and open for applications through Monday. We will continue to take those applications through Monday, at which time the application period will close, and we will finish out the rating and ranking of applications, do verifications with the GSAs, and then take it for approval of those highest ranking applicants that we have pending for. We also will be holding a water coalition meeting next week on the 1st. There are several people I know on this call or in the meeting that potentially are going to be a part of that. And that's where we're at.
Does anyone have any questions? I'm looking at the guys in the room for the land fallowing applications. Pretty familiar with it. Yep, good at this point. All right. It's what, year 3, Susan?
Yes, this is the 3rd year.
Yeah, good.
The second year for Tri-County.
Yeah, second year for Tri-County, yeah. All right, thank you, Susan.
You're
All right,
welcome.
let's get in, let's get into the groundwater allocation. That's probably the main reason that most of you are on this call. Oh, I don't need, you've got to start opening my computer up like I was gonna be controlling this, I'm so used to. Okay, so if you remember from our last meeting, we had some discussion on what, some of the general ideas on the allocation. I'm going to revisit a couple of those very quickly to just bring everybody back up to speed, and then we're going to talk about what we're proposing, and then I'm going to ask you to make some hard decisions at the end. So I hope everybody is ready to have some conversation about some of the decisions that need to be made. And the ultimate plan is, after we leave this meeting with your guys' thoughts, we're going to put it all on paper and get a draft to Deanna, and then once she's happy with it, we're going to get it out to everybody to review, so that by the time we meet again, you will have seen it and you will have questions and comments and markups and everything else for us. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about allocation amounts and exactly how those were derived. We're going to talk about the triggers that happen if we exceed subsidence values. And this is the tough part that I was going to mention earlier, where I want your guys' input, is what kind of enforcement actions and others, items like that, we should incorporate into the policy. And I will tell you from discussions with State Board staff, this is what they're looking for, right? X happens, we take these actions, and what kind of enforcement are we going to be willing to put in place to ensure compliance with the policy? All of this that I'm going to mention today, again, is draft, right? You guys have plenty of opportunity to comment on all of this and give more input. So keep that in mind too. All right, so remember, the allocation, this is going back to our last meeting a month ago. Our allocation was based on the values that came out of Appendix E of the groundwater model. These were the values that Tom Harder's model came through for the Tule subbasin, and essentially assigned sustainable values for each GSA. Now, these values that you see on the screen, it's the last column that says total. That's the actual amount of pumping allocated for Tri-County. And then those are the values that we set as our numbers that we are trying to achieve. One of the things that you'll notice as we go through the allocation, you're going to ask me things like precept credits and all of that. None of that matters because it's all built into these numbers. The model took into account precipitation, and it took into account the recharge from the mountains. It took into account all of that, and it looks at it from an in and out standpoint, right? A water budget balance. And it says, okay, as we start to move down towards sustainable values, what amount of pumping should we do every year to that? These are the values, again, that came out of the model, and these are the values that we stuck to. This was the discussion we had last meeting a month ago.
Question real quick, Mayor.
Sure.
The reported pumping, where did that number come from? The 260,000 acre foot. Upright.
Oh, that was the calculated value so the allocation, if you look at from 2020 to 2024 on that last column, the totals column,
right,
that's 201. The actual amount of pumping was approximately 260 based on what we reported in our annual reports and the ET value.
Okay, so ET, the extraction value,
The E-
how is
yeah.
that 260?
Yeah, we took the ET, we calculated it back to an extraction. Obviously, it's inclusive of any groundwater pumping that occurred in Angela as well. Okay? So that's the reality of how much approximately that we pumped, that we estimated we pumped in those 4 years. And according to Tom's model, we should have only pumped 200 or 201,000. The reason we included that was to kind of show you that we're already behind where the model has predicted us to be. All right, now that's, oh, no, I'm sorry, no, wait, you're way ahead of me. I did say okay.
It kind of went like this.
Yeah, I did say okay.
Is this just the Tule sub-basin portion of
Yes,
the county?
That's
yes,
correct.
it's strictly the Tule sub-basin portion, yes. Okay, so, in the pink highlighted there, we have the allocation at 2025 was gonna be 53,000. We're actually starting from 2026, so I just wanna be clear, I keep writing 2020, Bob. I can't get it through to Bob to make these slides, and I'm like, Bob, we're starting in 2026. So in 2026, I'm sorry, I can't read that number, is it 50,000?
50,000.
Yeah, 50,000. So we're starting this process in 2026 because the current policy goes through 2025. Okay? The point being that we're gonna go from that 50,000 down to a sustainable value of 18,000. Now, that 18,000, and these numbers are total pumping, they are not divided by aquifer. I'm gonna get into that in the next slide. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that we revisit the issue of Appendix E. These were the values that when you see the allocation table that we made, it is based on the ultimately pumping this much groundwater every year. All right, Stacy, now.
Next slide.
Okay, the native allocation. Now remember, the native allocation was set by the subbasin across the entire subbasin. This is the amount of recharge that occurs naturally across the subbasin. So any imported water that you might see, that means Frank Kern water, any other water that comes in that's imported into the area is not included in that native allocation. That native allocation is slightly higher than the current one, which then I do mean slight. Currently it's 0.18, and the new revised value is 0.22 of native allocation. Okay, so we then working, and again, anywhere you see 2025, just make it 2026, please. 2026, we are going to start with a transitional allocation of 1.6 acre feet. And then, and it'll work down from there. It'll decrease from there. Yeah. And you can see in that last column the transitional values. So we're going to end up, starting in 2026, starting to drop that from 1.6 and then ultimately down to essentially, 0.
Is there a percentage there without doing math? Is it?
So Brandon, it's based on that total pumping, right? Stacey, go back one slide to that. So remember that total native, or excuse me, that volume of water that it's in Appendix E, the last column.
Yeah.
So in order to hit those, that those decrease over time, the transitional decreases.
Yeah, sorry, I guess, is there without doing the math in my head, is there like a % reduction annually, like a specific one? Is it like?
No, it's literally to hit those, yeah,
numbers?
it's literally off those numbers.
So what drives those numbers?
It's Tom's model that's essentially saying when projects and other items come into when they predicting that projects will get built and water will come into the area. And then he does a nice ramp down. It's trying to keep the ramp down, it's not necessarily by a GSA level, but at a sub-basin level. Yeah.
The native yield of 0.22,
Yes.
is that, you said is not any water imported, but does that include precipitation yield?
Yes.
So we don't know from year to year what that would be.
Yeah, so that native yield is based on just the reoccurrence, right? And what the model says is, hey, in this time frame, every 5 to 7 years, you know, this is what the cycle looks like, and they just repeat that cycle into the future. And that's how they predicted the 0.22.
But are we gonna allow on wet years to add in extra precipitation?
No. Not for
No.
native, yeah,
Well, okay, not for native, but
yeah.
will there be for Tri-County an additional precipitation yield?
No. It's already built in.
So basically what you're saying is that 0.22, when we get to 2040, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll,
Not even on a wet year.
yeah, it'll come down to the 18,000, right? Because those wet years, Martin, the idea here is those wet years have to get you through the dry years.
No, I get it.
So you can't pump more in the wet years, not that you want to, right?
I'm trying to get it off in my head.
But, yeah.
Doesn't it rain more than 3 inches? How can you only have 3 inches of usage?
Yeah.
Availability.
So that is how much of it makes it into the groundwater that you can use.
I thought Myron's question was it's rain and sustainable, and you said yes.
No,
We get a precipitation yield now, right?
yes.
That we didn't have when we first started. You know, and that obviously offsets our, which is one pumping, right?
That's all
It's a
based,
different calculation because it offsets the ET, because we're using a consumptive model. When we
Mhm.
go to a meter-based, that precipitation credit, there will be an offset for
Right.
that. It's a different
Because
calculation.
this is based on pumping,
Mhm.
and right now the measurement's based on the
Consumption.
ET, satellite consumption, so
Mhm.
right now you have to get a credit for the precept, otherwise you're getting shortchanged.
So when do you anticipate it going to pumping, 26?
so Stacey, do you have a question?
Deanna just answered it, that the native yield changed because you're moving to metering, not ET, and so
Yeah.
there's no longer a need to add in precipitation because it's not gonna be counted against you as use, right?
Yes, that's right,
Okay, that was my question, thank you.
yeah. So remember, and the reason I stay on this slide for a second is because this is the actual volume of pumping that's going to be allowed moving forward. And yes, you're gonna have wet years, you're gonna have dry years, we understand that, but those wet years have to carry us through the dry years on the volume of pumping. And since we're not looking at ET values anymore, we're gonna be going to the meters and looking directly at how much groundwater is extracted. So these are our best predictions for right now, but the 18,000 is probably gonna be very close to what the reality is going to be at the end. And Byron, just to be clear, if these values are off, you know, we can adjust. You know, if, let's say we end up with multiple wet years in a row, or other things happen, projects happen, other things affect us, then certainly we can revisit any of this. But where we're at right now, this is the best data set that we have. Okay. This is the good part of this conversation. It's gonna get a little bit tougher as we go along, because there's a few other restrictions we're gonna put in place. Yes, next slide, please. Okay. So, native allocation of 0.22. Transitional pumping starting at 1.6, and then decreasing as you see in that last column. And by the way, all of these slides will be made available, so everyone, you know, I want to make sure you guys are all well aware of that. We always do make them available. The penalties will not change. So the Tier 1 penalty and the Tier 2 penalties that we currently have, we're not looking to change those or change those amounts as we're currently sitting right now. I will, if you remember from our last conversation a month ago, I did that example calculation that even if, you know, we took that one example where we said if this one landowner was under this current, you know, what they currently paid in fees and penalties versus what they would pay under this new allocation policy, it was almost you know, 80% more. So there are, because we're reducing the transitional pumping, that's the big difference. You know, looking at me kind of funny.
I hate to ask this question because it kind of opens the box of work. But, Stark County has a lot of area that is fallow.
Yeah.
And I don't think that area should be stripped of a allocation necessarily, but is there any thought to taking some of that fallow allocation for sustainable or native and dispersing it to those who are in production?
So I'm glad you asked that question.
I thought you would.
So we had that conversation, and we talked about this in numerous different ways. Right now, what we're talking about is taking that 0.22, and that is based on spreading that over every acre of land in Tri-County. The transitional, similar to what the current policy is, only goes to people that were in production in 2018, and so if you got transitional now, you would continue to get transitional under this new policy. So that's ultimately, that's what we concluded, and that's what this discussion that you'll see today is based on. If there's a desire by the folks in this room and on this call, and anyone else to change that, we are very open to that, because we did look at saying, okay, what if native allocation only went to the folks that have transitional pumping? So if you currently have transitional, that means you have a well and you're currently running it. What if we limited all of the pumping to just those people rather than spreading that native allocation across every parcel? But that would mean that, you know, essentially just that limited set of landowners would get to get the pump, and there would be no allocation to anyone else.
So, Amir, by way of example, like the Fish and Game has some land
Yeah.
south of.
I was just gonna ask that the Bureau of Land Management, because we've been discussing a potential partnership with them, so. And they don't intend to do any pumping other than just for the wetlands.
So, I mean, we could make exceptions for environmental uses.
You know, I'm not sure how much that changes the numbers overall, but
Well, yeah, I mean, how many
a lot of
acres?
discussion, but
There's quite a few acres though, right?
about 60,000 acres, and I think we have 26,000 in production.
Right.
Up in the Merced subbasin, they had this opt-in, opt-out period. Interesting to model what somebody hasn't opted in, see what that would look like for the other people who have.
To elaborate on that a little bit more, Sebastian, I'm not familiar with the Merced program.
It's
They're
Madera, I think.
Oh,
Sorry,
Madera.
Sebastian.
I think both, but I'm more familiar with, at least in Merced subbasin, they're saying if you have land that was in production, you can opt in, or if it was like your hunting land or like wild land, state land, you could opt in for native yield. And if groups didn't opt in, then that pumping credits would go to other folks.
Yeah,
opting in
it's being discussed in Merced Subbasin GSA. It's been adopted in the Madera County GSA, so sorry, sorry about that. And it's based on their fees, so you could opt into paying the fees, and if you did, you would receive your portion of the native allocation. If you didn't opt into paying the fees on non-irrigated land, your portion of the native yield would go into a bucket that then got spread across all the acres that did opt into paying their fees.
I was just gonna ask that question about the fees, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this Tri-County has a land-based fee over all parcels 5 acres and larger, and that's, set through our Prop 218, that's set. There's no opting in, opting out of that.
But that,
Going forward, we could disenroll them from the 218 and eventually take their water.
Or pay them, pay their fees.
Yeah, I mean, then we go $10. So whoever's, if we get another 1/10 of an acre foot to the landowners, then get an extra $1.
yeah, it all helps, right? I mean, that was the point you guys made earlier, right? Yeah. I'm open to any, I like the suggestion, so I'll tell you what, we'll consider that and run some numbers by Deanna and bring them back, because, I think that's something worth modeling. And
26,000 out of 60,000 is farms.
yeah,
Yes, but that doesn't include the Wellfield of Angela, somehow that would have to be factored in as well.
How many acres is that?
I don't know, I'd have to,
That's fine.
yeah,
I don't remember how, it's not a very large area,
no.
I mean, relatively speaking.
But if Angela were to say, hey, no, we still want to maintain, they opt in, then that would knock out that issue.
Yeah, we'd have to figure out.
Yeah, we'd have to look at it.
7,480. 7,480. 0.22.
Oh, Steve, go ahead.
Thank you, everyone. If you take native yield away from fallow land, doesn't that punish growers if they have a large amount of acreage and they've been proactive in fallowing ground to support their irrigated agriculture? Isn't that kind of unintended negative consequence of doing that?
Yeah, Steve, that's one of the concerns that I was trying to figure out is how could we work around that very issue? If we were to go down this path, how would we address that? And try to figure out a way to make that work.
Well, if the landowner's opting in and enrolling their fallowed acreage, then they would claim their native yield to that fallow.
I agree with Steve, we want to avoid that, and so that opt-in would take care of that.
And that's a good point, and thank you for saying that, because that would address that.
It's
On
worth
their opt-in,
exploring.
opt-out, are they building that into a Prop 218 that's going to happen, or is it separate from that? Do you know?
To the best of my ability, it is, at least in the Merced Subbasin, it is built into that.
Built into that,
The 218 is built into the opt-in, opt-out.
built in the opt-in, opt-out. Have to figure something different, or?
It's worth exploring
It's
at
worth
least.
exploring.
Yeah.
It's the time is limited. We
I
got time.
think
limits
my
too.
concern would be, assuming you need a response from everybody opting in or opting out, how sure are you would get a response from the other 30,000 plus acres?
Well, you're not gonna get a response from some of them because
Well, exactly.
they don't even exist, they're probably dead.
Most of the land that is fallow, the majority of it is either federal or state land.
Okay.
So what you do is you set it,
And I don't know exactly how that works. This is gonna have to be a question for legal.
you do it as an opt-in, and if you don't respond by a certain date, you're automatically out.
Yep.
That works well for, the individual landowners, and, you know, we can contact and do all of the certified letters and all of those things, but I'm not certain how that works for the state and federal.
Works great when they send me a DMV notice, if I don't pay, I get automatically a late fee, and it goes, so it's no problem from their end.
But so they're having to pay for that now, the state or the federal? They're paying two eighteen?
No, not for the 218.
Yeah, so it's not like we're taking a bill.
So they're exempt.
Yeah.
What's that? They're not.
They're not paying, why would they have it?
They current policy is they all get their native allocation, and, Bureau of Land Management has their own basis safe account with their allocation in it. So we would be unwinding something that's been, you know, in place for 5 years. State has just not participated at all. But again, this is a question for legal, and I'd have to talk to, you know, the attorneys on what is actual available to us to do in this situation. If it was all private landowners, this would be a different conversation. I think, again, the opt-in, opt-out works real easily, but I don't know how it works with the state and federal government.
Definitely worth looking at.
Yeah, Deanna, this is Kathy. Having worked on the BLM side of things, you know, the federal government was deemed exempt and they wanted to come to the table. So I think that they would be willing to discuss whatever are the needs. They're not planning, right now we've talked to them about leaving the allocation in the ground and not using it except for up to 500 acre feet for the wetlands. So I think that's a discussion you could have with them. I don't know about the state.
Okay, thank you.
It's definitely worth exploring some more. We had some of these discussions, at least at a preliminary level, because we were trying to figure out ways to make this work for the pumpers. So it's worth exploring and trying to see if we can come back to you guys with some options here.
You've already set your 25 allocations?
The current allocations already is.
25 is in the bucket,
Yeah.
Okay,
the bucket that we're in now.
That's a year off.
so it's just a year off on the
Yeah.
table.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. We would be starting 2026 at 1.46.
And that's based on a water year?
It's based on a water year, yes. And it would be, and then plus the 0.22 on top of that. So the transitional would be 1.46. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Stacey.
This is not based on the allocation to non-native lands. It's a question about the allocation in 2040 that you showed on the previous slide is 18,000 acre feet a year. Is that 18,000 inclusive of what Angiola pumps, or is that Angiola pumps its amount and then the 18,000 is split across the rest?
No, that's inclusive of all pumping in the
Okay.
subbase, in the GSA, excuse me.
Thank you.
You're allowed to pump 24,000 based on your agreement?
Oh, that's a different agreement.
Yeah.
That's
More than 18.
yeah, that's outside of Tri-County. I mean, that's their agreement with Pixley and Lower Tule currently, but that,
Was that gonna impact the amount of water we can draw though?
we are developing this allocation policy to be inclusive of everybody, including Angela.
So if the 18,000, your allocation is gonna be, is the 1.46 plus the 0.22 per acre.
Then, right.
This is all draft.
Yeah.
So anybody recording this, I want to repeat that, this is draft. So these are the current discussions that we're having.
Maybe I'm jumping ahead, but your cease pumping trigger comment, the way I'm reading it, tier 2's gone. Right there, you only have that tier 1 transitional pumping, and then it says enforcement notice issued if anything exceeds the cumulative annual allocation. Am I misinterpreting that?
No, so I mean, that's the discussion right now, that's what we're proposing is what kind of triggers and at what point do we say, hey, you're done? And what kind of enforcement are we gonna do? So we looked at a variety of different enforcement options, you know, reducing, if you went over any 1 year, reducing the next year. And that's fine, and then, you know, plus the penalties would still be in place, the tier 1, tier 2. But at the end of the day, if we don't hit those numbers that were in those Appendix E values that I just said, we're never gonna get to sustainability. So at some point, and this is what the state's looking for too, is what is our cease pumping actual trigger, right? At what point do we say, hey, this is all the water you're gonna pump, and we just can't, you know, otherwise people are just gonna pay the 500 and keep pumping. And at what point do we say we have to get to sustainability? And in order to get to sustainability, we have to stick to these values.
Yeah. I'm just trying to understand it, so we would have basically a 5-year block. Is that correct?
We were not planning the 5-year block. We were giving allocations on a year-to-year basis, because the 5-year block was one of the issues that we got criticized for, you know, in our current policy. I'm not, again, all of this is what we're thinking. If you guys feedback.
Well, I'm just, the way I read it is that I have access to 7.6 acres.
Of transitional pumping.
Right, over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
Maybe, unless it's stuff further down the slideshow, but where is that cap? The hard cap?
You would get your allocation yearly. You went over your tier
The
1
1.6.
allocation, you would go into tier 2. But if you exceed the 7.6, it would trigger a cease pumping.
Yes.
Hi.
Okay, so the 1.6 then is now my new cap, if it's on an annual basis?
The 1 point, and it goes,
Per year, right?
Yeah,
So it should be 1.4.
But if you exceed 7.6 over 5, then that would trigger the,
right.
and you would be down to only your native.
Would that 7.6 be a rolling number as the year moves on, or would that change from year to year?
No, that would be the total for the 5-year.
Or just, for the 5-year block?
Yeah,
So
5-year block.
while you're in that block?
Yeah, while you're in that block.
So there's essentially still an aspect of the block in there?
Yes.
So you can do it all in 2 years, but
You're gonna pay a higher
you
price?
pay a higher price because you're already going over the 1.6.
But Myron,
Tier 1 and tier 2?
no, it's worse than that.
125 and 500.
Yeah.
Oh, 500, okay, so tier 2 would be 500.
If you did all the 7.6 in 2 years, that's where our cease pumping comes in, right? That's why we have it. So you'd be looking at no pumping in years 3, 4, and 5.
But, right?
Well,
If you got half your if you can only farm half your orchard anyway,
Yeah.
you might as well
farm it.
farm it, and then years 3 and 4 and 5 is done anyway, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but, yeah.
I mean, give landowners an opportunity to figure out how they want to.
Or if you have a wet year versus a dry year, right? That's what's nice about the 5-year bucket, because certain years you get more allocation.
Right.
Or precip or whatever it is.
Right.
And then you can stretch it out even further, right?
Yeah,
Your transitional is your annual cap of tier 1 charges, we'll call it.
yes.
You have use of all 7.6, but if you go over your annual allocation of tier 1, you dip into tier 2.
Yes.
You eat up through that 7.6, and once you're done, you're done.
You're done with transitional pumping, yes.
Just make sure I
Yes.
understand it all. About water on paper.
So like recharge credits, so those recharge credits, all of that would still exist, and those would still be in your account. And then.
They'd be on top of this.
They'd be on top of this, yes.
Any surface water brought in,
Yeah.
would be added to the account, anything like that.
And how you use those, we can work those, we'll probably do the same thing that we're doing now on how you're able to use which bucket and when.
How many acre feet of recharge credits are on the books now?
those are mostly housed in Angela's account because of all the flooding that happened in the Angela area, and don't know how available those credits are. So there's not a lot roaming around, let's say that,
Yeah.
at this time. I still want somebody going and trying to think, where are these credits, where should we go, because they're not really.
No, I was just trying to understand kind of volume wise.
Angela, and I'll just further that, Angela's very concerned, those board has expressed to Tri-County in written form, they are very concerned that those credits were created in the upper aquifer, and the majority of the pumping's in the lower aquifer, and that's why they're reluctant to sell those credits off, because until we have a bifurcated aquifer and they know where the pumping's occurring, they've kind of put a moratorium on any more credits. So, that's my understanding from them at the currently.
Right, I will. Most are pumping in the lower aquifer?
They have both lower and shallow, but, you know, they have plenty of lower aquifer. State, city, and, you know, are they gonna use their credits for that? I have no idea.
So if it was limited between the aquifers, they would limit their credits.
So the credits that were created did not have that restriction on them and currently does not. And so, you know, they're holding that restriction on their own credits. That's what they're saying. But Tri-County just, you know, those, I have seen, again, this is why we have an advisory group and why we have a board, but, you know, they were created under a one bucket system. So, and my thought is, unless somebody restricts themselves, that one bucket system would kind of be grandfathered in. You know, we don't have 2023 years very, very often, right? So, you know, the next 2023 year, you know, maybe we're at the two aquifer system, that's what we're intending, and maybe we treat those credits differently in the recharge policy, but the current policy did not have that bifurcated. It was a one bucket system.
In the end, the subsidence is gonna have its own triggers built into it, so there's gonna be limitations that happen.
Yes.
Based on
Yes.
reality.
We haven't touched on that yet.
No, we haven't got there
Yeah.
yet, but I mean, I'm
Yeah.
just thinking that, I mean, it kinda does have
Yeah.
context, because, I mean, you can spend a bunch of time trying to figure out how to deal with it, or you can just say, let's just roll forward and,
Yes.
sort itself out.
So, couple things before we leave the slide. The 0.22, that is the native allocation. What we're currently thinking, based on what the information we have, is we will give you the 0.22 in either, and you get to make this decision yourself, either the upper or the lower, or you can split it however you want to split it between the two, but you don't get more than 0.22 of native, okay? So you can take all of it in the lower, if all your wells are on the lower, you can take it all in the upper, or you can say, I want it, 50-50 or 40-60 or whatever, right? But we're gonna give you that flexibility of where your wells are located and how you would like to allocate that native we wanna be as flexible as we can with that, that approach, but you don't get to exceed the 0.22 of native, allocation.
Let me make sure I heard that right. Sustainable yield can be pulled from either upper or lower.
Yes. Yes. Or a combination, but not to exceed that value. Yeah. So we will give you some flexibility on that. It's not perfect. That what I'm proposing is not perfect, but it is giving you some flexibility. Okay.
Are we, maybe you're going there.
Yeah, go ahead.
The transitional though, is that where we're going next? Where, is there a upper or lower differentiation there on the transitional water?
Yeah, so we didn't do that either, and however you allocate your native, that's how we were gonna allocate the transitional as well. So if you put all your native in the bottom, we'll give you the full one, the full transition out of the bottom. and vice versa, of course, right? So however you guys want to allocate your native is how we'll allocate the transitional to that account.
What if I wanted to say, hey, I wanna claim all my sustainable yield out of the upper, but utilize transitional out of the lower?
Ooh, that's a good question. Honestly, I figured you were gonna do one or the other, but,
Yeah.
but we're more than happy to look into that and say, okay, can do exactly what you just said, because ultimately that's the same volume of water.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess unless there's limitations on how much you can pull from which aquifer, it won't matter, but if limitations are set per aquifer, then I think we'll want to be able to play with it.
We were trying we're trying to give you as much flexibility in our initial
Okay.
program.
But then if there's no limitations, I think I'm still, I'll be able to play with it.
Yeah. Let me make sure, that's a very good question. Let me make sure, I don't think there should be any concerns, because ultimately it's the same volume of water.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, but, I mean, you get into the subsidence portion.
yeah, that's where I was just
Right.
gonna go there, is the subsidence is gonna be the other seed
Yeah.
pumping.
Or I could do vice versa too, right? If I want all my sustainable out of the lower and transitional out of the upper.
Right. Right. I just assumed everybody's wells were either one or the other, and you could pump, you'd wanna pump here and here.
The subsidence triggers though would be what would decrease the lower aquifer
Yes.
pumping.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So even if you put 90% in the lower, once that subsidence triggered, and it would have to go to the upper.
Yes.
Right, yeah. And I think if we get into the minimum thresholds and the subsidence portion, and I know I have only a certain limit, I'm gonna do what I can to strictly utilize the upper if I can, right?
Right.
Where's the equal layer start for your, in Portrait County, is that about 500 feet?
It's a little bit shallower than 500 over, on the eastern side, and around 500 on the west. Yeah.
Are most of your deep wells perforated top, upper and lower?
Older ones are both. I think some of these new ones focused on lower, because that's where goes more water, right?
Yeah. That's certainly what the well permits show, Byron, exactly what you just said. The older ones tend to be both, and a lot of the newer wells tend to be exactly in the lower aquifer, what we tend to see. All right, Stacey, now, next slide. Okay, so, some of you that were here for the earlier meeting have already seen this. So we were talking about, the two requirements for cease pumping. One would be if you exceed your transitional values over that 5-year period. And the other one, of course, would be driven by the subsidence. And I think for the people that are in the room, at least, there's some maps. I don't know if we have enough for oh, you got it, yeah. And each of these is 4 sections. Each one of those squares is 4 sections, and each of them has a specific allowable maximum subsidence value, which is what we're calling the minimum threshold of that MT value that you see there. And that's the value, if you're looking at the map, for the people in the room, that's the dark, the value in the black. And the value in the red is the value that has already occurred since 2020. That's the amount of subsidence in feet that has occurred since 2020.
So just so everybody understands, an MT is a minimum threshold. That is the point of which you cannot go beyond. For subsidence or for water level decline, that's a sigma term. It's just the minimum threshold is the point of which you cannot go beyond.
The MO?
The MO is the measurable objective. That is where we're trying to manage to. We want to hit our measurable objectives as we move along.
You need to update your slide that those sections are 2,540 acres.
I know. Yeah, there are four sections, for each one of the squares. Oh, I can't get to it.
Stuck in his ways.
He's stuck in his ways, yeah.
But, I mean, the section is 640 acres. but-
Yeah, but it's not one section, there's four, yeah.
That's what we call it a zone.
So, pumping reduction notices to landowners if you start to see a zone that where subsidence is approaching the end. Those three potential actions are just, shoot from the hip values. Those are the kind of things that we want to discuss today. So two items, the cease pumping, we're basically saying it's occurring under two scenarios, right? One is you exceed your transitional value for 5 years. And the second one is you have hit the MT, okay? I know it's different than what I just wrote on there, so that's what I'm asking you guys.
Say it one more time, please.
Brandon, the two criteria would be if you exceed the transitional value for 5 years. That was the previous slide we just talked about.
Right.
And then the second criteria would be if you hit the MT value for that zone.
Those are your cease pumping.
Yeah.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, now,
And
one of them applies to both, the transitional applies to both the upper and lower depending on which one you're pumping from. But subsidence would apply only to the lower. So we'd have to, when we write the policy, that's how we're gonna write it.
But the 50% reduction would only be in the lower.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. So any triggers and all these would apply to the
That
lower.
was gonna be my question, because that would make,
So when you hit 100% of the MT, there's still pumping in the upper?
Yeah, you can have pumping in the upper. Model shows no impact from pumping in the upper to subsidence.
So there's no play in the upper layer?
There is, Jay, but not that's gonna have significant, impacts, and what Thompson has shown that the, pumping in the lower is where we're seeing the subsidence.
so if I had, sorry, this way.
I was just gonna say it again, I take major opposition to that policy.
To,
To no pumping when you're at 70% threshold.
yes,
I don't think your data is conclusive, and it's all based on surrounding GSAs.
yeah.
And, it's a double-edged sword, you get too low a threshold, and you get severe consequences.
Sure.
I don't think that's equitable.
If I had an upper aquifer well, though, and that zone hits the minimum threshold, I could still access all my transitional water and sustainable yields out of the upper aquifer.
Yes, that's what we're proposing right now. So, Jay, let's go back to your point. So, the discussion on the table for the pumping is not necessarily the subsidence value, that was the morning discussion. But if there was a minimum threshold for subsidence, whatever value it is, 6 feet, once you hit that, we're essentially saying, look, you've used up all the pumping in the lower aquifer in that area. And what we're trying to do is put in some manner to enforce this. And that's where the cease pumping is. Would that policy, just that concept of a policy, would that be acceptable? Or you hit
100%. I think
Yeah.
the problem is the 100% reduction at 70, and I don't think that's what we're proposing.
No.
We're proposing
100%.
100% the lower aquifer at below minimum threshold. If you were to take the subsidence below the minimum threshold, which is what we cannot breach, or we're back in a state situation, at that point, the lower aquifer would be reduced to 100%, but not 70%. But I think that's.
Well, that's different.
Yeah, that's not correct, so.
So obviously, I have two issues, one is minimum threshold, and then the rules on
Right.
where you can extract your water. I mean,
earlier, we're just talking about sustainable yield, which isn't a lot of water, but take your pick, right? And I agree with that. It's too restrictive and too short of a time frame. And I get it, we gotta get there by 2040. But some of this theoretical stuff. Or 26 is, we're done, right?
Yeah, so.
And that's the problem.
Yeah, so, and I understand it, you guys are looking at the values that are listed, you know, on that, well pattern. But depending on whatever the MT is, you know, even if we up those values, once you hit that, we have, at that point, we're saying that negative impacts are occurring. And undesirable results are occurring as defined by Sigma. And we as a GSA need to take concrete action. So you can do what we're proposing, which is, you know, you start to hit, and as you get closer, we're gonna start to reduce your allocation in the lower aquifer. But once you hit that MT, are we gonna say, hey, that's the cease pumping value in the lower aquifer?
I'd say let it play out a little bit. I still can't agree at 7 feet in one area and 2.5 in another. There's nothing to the west out there.
I think it's very much two different things, right?
Yeah.
If you're talking about strictly the policy
Yeah.
to get there, you know, that's a discussion, but then I think the other part of the discussion is what are the numbers
Right, of
to
course.
go along with that policy?
Yeah, and what I'm hearing from
I
you
agree
guys,
with that.
what I'm hearing is you guys, the number is driving your acceptance of the policy.
Exactly, because like Lower Tule and Pixley, when you look at these numbers, then you say, well, they got, you know, their numbers are way better than ours, so no wonder they adopted it.
Right.
When we look at our numbers, we're just going, we can't survive, so why adopt it?
Yeah.
You know, that's the problem. Divide by 2.5.
Yeah, so.
You got a 5-year life or you got a 12-year life, that's a big deal.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Regardless of that, if the model is true and the upper aquifer is not causing subsidence, I would suggest to try to pump as much as on the upper aquifer and have talk to your neighbors about that, because if you can slow subsidence in any way, it will prolong the time that the southeast area has. You have to slow that subsidence. If that subsidence rate, if we're all pumping low and we trigger, and you know, we're talking a couple of years, right? No matter which way we go, we're talking what we can extend, and the only way to really extend is to try to move to that upper aquifer as much as possible.
I think in theory, that's a great policy, Deanna.
I know.
If you're set up with wells that are certain depth, certain perk, engineered, what are you gonna do, go invest more money to pump out of the lower aquifer? I mean, you never pay that. Yeah, drill new wells, right? So, I mean, we gotta talk practical too, right?
Also on top of that, I mean, please don't answer this question, but in the ETGSA, they don't have a corporate clay layer out there.
They saw subsidence.
So they're pumping from the upper aquifer on paper, right? Or the only aquifer.
They have well depths that are low too. I mean, I've asked this question of a number of times, because it's not all about the Corcoran clay. It is about the amount, the volume of pumping and how low those wells are, and about creating depressions in areas, and whether west or east you see the subsidence issue and it's a problem.
I think the other thing that makes it difficult to swallow this bill is the fact that on the subsidence map, we're nowhere near as bad as I'm sorry, I'm going back to the southeast management zone area.
Sure,
but
sure.
Compared to other areas, our cone of depression, if you want to, is much smaller than other areas.
Yeah, the bottom line is you have less cumulative subsidence occurring in this area than in other parts of the subbasin by a lot. I mean, you can clearly see that. I mean, in some places.
But yet, they're getting grace because it's so bad.
Again, you're sandwiched between 3 entities that want very low subsidence levels, and the levels have to be coordinated according to according to
Well,
Cigna.
So I think so, because again, I mean, theoretically, the policy, it makes sense on how to get out of probation and avoid state intervention. I think that's also something we gotta consider. But how do we look at this where if we are not major contributors to the subsidence, yet we still have the lowest minimum thresholds? How do we, that's the question that I think we need to work on.
What was the technical basis for setting the minimum thresholds on society? Was there a straight formula, or did it get adjusted based
No,
on
so
politics,
essentially,
political boundaries?
the, Alpol came back and said because of flooding concerns, they wanted the subsidence to be zero on their border because of impacts to the Deer Creek.
Flooding.
Yeah, so that was one, okay? So I'm just gonna go in a counterclockwise direction. So that's to the west, northwest of us. And then Kern came back and said 4 feet at their border is what they set it at, and they've turned in their GSP. So they want 4 feet at their, so that's directly south of us. And then Delano Early Mart, which is to the east, said they want 0 because their pipeline, their distribution pipeline system, and they did a study on this, is being impacted by subsidence, and that it cannot take any more subsidence, that it needs to be 0.
Is that the same study that they won't show you?
They just did.
They did, but there's gonna be an additional study. We're going to do an additional study with our technical as well as the sub-basin technical and Delano Early Mart technical to look at the actual possible detriment to the pipeline system and hopefully negotiate, there's, some culpability, some sort of mitigation that allows for additional subsidence to occur in that area.
Good question, sorry. I guess one, how long are we expecting that study to take?
Good question.
It's a very good question.
Let me ask my first one then, maybe it's quicker.
Yeah.
Do we have to have a coordination agreement with the current sub-basin?
Right?
I don't think so.
No,
So
but,
then,
but the state is looking at boundary conditions and telling us to look at boundary conditions. So, it was intra-basin coordination. When there was inter-basin coordination, there was a timeline for that. I don't recall now. Was that specifically?
It did say under Sigma that you cannot cause problems for others.
okay.
It
Well, and
paraphrased
4
that.
feet is better than 0.
Right,
So,
right, of course.
I mean, I would take 4 feet, but I was just more curious. Yeah.
I would love to put 7 over there. It's not.
Again, DEID has responsibility to take care of their own subsidence with the volume of water they have. They're not spread out correctly and where they're getting pulled from, where they're sinking their water.
Yeah,
And they shouldn't have to be putting that on us.
I don't disagree with you. That statement is very valid, and it will be considered in the study. We will make sure that those ideas are incorporated in the study.
So I don't want, DEID to influence this study unduly. It feels like that's the influence they have on some of this stuff. I don't wanna get too accusational, but they gotta get granular and do their stuff, what they're expecting us to do.
Agreed.
That's a good point, Jay.
And that's why I was curious on the timeline. I think it's hard to adopt a policy when we don't have all the information. That's gonna impact the majority of the people.
And we don't have to get to all of, there is a year here, right? I would not suggest taking up an entire year. But we don't have to get to the Tule sub-basin allocation policy complete, by the end of the year. I would like to get the policy portion for Tulare Lake complete, because Tulare Lake has much less time, right?
Yeah.
So let's try to get that complete, and so, some of these things, again, maybe the MT moves a little bit, but if we can get kind of the policy in place and move along Tulare Lake, we can continue the discussions on this Tule southeast area.
Well, I think that's ultimately what I was getting to is, let's say the study takes 3 months, 4 months, I don't know, If, again, the idea of the policy, to get out of probation, we have to go that route. I don't disagree with that. I think the numbers associated
yeah, Steve, hold on just a sec. I was gonna say something to Brandon, now I lost my train of thought. That's okay, Brandon, I'll get back to you. I'm sure it'll come back to me. Steve, go ahead.
Thank you, Amir. I had asked a question in the chat just now as well. I just wanted to clarify, when it states a 100% reduction at 70% of minimum threshold, is that a 100% reduction of transitional pumping, or is that 100% reduction of both transitional pumping plus native yield, i.e. zero pumping at all?
Yeah, so we're, just to be clear, we're not gonna do it at 70, we're gonna do it at 100% of the MT value. And it would be 100% reduction of the transitional pumping. In the lower aquifer only, yeah.
So you can't even, I would say it's probably, we're not assigning which water source it is, it's more assigning the aquifer. Because if I have a shallow well and I'm pumping strictly out of the upper aquifer, I still have access to my transitional.
Yeah, but in the upper aquifer.
So it's 100% reduction of the lower aquifer.
Yeah, yeah, for the lower aquifer only. Yeah. We can look at, please.
Thank you for addressing that.
Yeah, you're welcome, Steve.
Yep.
Sorry.
Look at PICFLE's policy for essentially what we'll
Yes.
be looking at.
Yeah.
What are the thresholds that they're using? Did they land on? But no, I'm talking about the.
Yeah, the
40%.
Yeah.
Because they have 40% they're supposed to investigate and.
Yes.
And do meters, and 50% they lose access to certain,
Yeah.
to all of the transitional water, or?
I think it was portion.
At 75, you lose.
But 75% is what I think where I saw them.
Yes, you lose.
I didn't know if that changed.
No, it's the same, but we would, for our policy, we would propose something slightly different for the pumping allocation. So, yeah, last slide, please. And we're almost out of time. We've got 3 minutes. I think this is a similar one that you saw last time. Some of the key items here, just to close this up, is, look, we would still give you all credits for the recharge policy that we have, so all those credits would still be there. You'd still be able to, the current, or the new policy would still allow you to trade any unused portions, those types of things. So I just wanted to, I threw the slide back up there just to, revisit those issues. That as far as the policy is concerned, a lot of the existing policy we'd like to keep in place and make sure that you're still getting, encourage the recharge, encourage getting those credits and being able to use those credits and being able to trade those credits. Now, if we do go to, what we said earlier about limiting, how we spread the native yield, we'll have to figure out what makes the most sense in terms of trading and all those kinds of things. So there's
One more question, please. Your injection wells, is that currently happening by
anywhere.
anybody?
No, not anybody.
Not in-
Is there any,
Wetlands.
of course, I hear about it over there, but
Yeah.
is there data on that? I'm sure everybody's got old wells and it's hard to find surface water to inject. I get that.
So, a couple things. We try to pilot test out in South Fork near south of Lemoore, or excuse me, north of Lemoore, in that area, and it, was sort of effective. We would be injecting into the combined aquifer here, into the lower aquifer, and that has its own challenges. So, Jay, if anyone's interested in that, we would probably recommend getting with us and going into a lot more discussions in detail. There's water quality concerns. Now, the good thing about this area down here is that there's not a lot of domestics. So the water quality concerns similar to Westlands would be able to go away. In areas where there's a lot of domestics, I think injection would have an additional set of challenges. But injection is a possibility if you can find the water source. And again, as a reminder, the current recharge policy draft that we adopted, yeah. Everything blends into one. The recharge policy for Southport, let's see, I'm looking at Johnny. We're still going through the recharge policy with Johnny on Southport, but the recharge policy for Tri-County, basically gives us credit in the aquifer that we recharge. So if you're recharging the upper aquifer, you're getting credit in the upper aquifer, and if you're recharging the lower, you get credit there. So if you're interested, let's talk offline and figure out a way to make it work for you, and give you an idea of what the costs were in other places, including in what Westland's had to go through. Sure. Okay, we're at 12:01, so I'm 1 minute over. Any final questions before we wrap up? So what is going to come next is we're going to take the allocation policy that we've discussed. We're going to put it in writing as an actual policy. It'll have all the details. It'll have, what's included, all of these things. It'll rehash or restate the penalties. It'll restate the recharge credits, all of those things. Give that to Deanna. And once, like I said, once she's happy with it, we'll get it out to the rest of you so that you'll have it before the next meeting for this group, which is October 23rd. And that'll give you a chance to review it in more detail. And your concerns about the mitigation or the MTs for subsidence and those values, we'll continue to address those as well separately.
Yeah.
No decision on that. Let's get some more data from the study,
Yeah,
and
we need to get you.
we got some time.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think that, we're gonna have to eventually line up some discussions. If we're gonna look at changing the MT that's been submitted by all the other GSAs, we're gonna have to have some discussions with Alpha and as well as Pixley, because if both of those two are unwilling to coordinate with us on that effort, it makes our decisions much tougher.
But we didn't agree on those yet, right?
We have not adopted. But they've adopted, so,
For their area.
for their area, but
They're not, so how are they in coordination with everybody if not everybody's established their coordination agreement?
the challenge for Trey County is to change the MTs when everybody else has adopted certain maps. Bring scrutiny on Trey County particularly. So that's the, but I mean, if we're in a position where we say we're willing to accept that, that's,
So, Myron, I will say we tried that in the 22 document where we had some different values, and we got called out by the state on some of the deficiencies that were listed on 3 different occasions on the last staff report from the state. Called out Tri-County for being different, specifically called us out. And so I would caution you to at least consider being in coordination. Now, we can hopefully convince everybody that these values need to be different, but we can stay coordinated that way.
I heard Alpha and Pixley. Do we also address DEID?
I would suggest we let the study play out first.
Sure.
I don't think they'll make any concession until the study's complete.
And your firm's doing the study, Mayor?
No, Tom's firm is gonna do the study for the basin as a whole.
Okay.
But what we're doing, along with others, is to scope the study and make sure that the work that's gonna be done as part of the study is going to answer the actual question on the table and make sure that it's going to lead to the data set that we need.
Well, it seems to me we're putting a lot of faith in Thomas, and I don't know the man. And he's probably a solid citizen.
Yes.
Do we ever
Yes.
talk about getting somebody else to measure this and confirm?
Well, Geosyntex did a study on the they looked at the conclusions that Elena Earlymark had come to with their study. They've initially, and we have some data that we can provide in the scope of work through that.
Sure.
Tom has been working for the subbasin now since 2015, so almost 10 years of doing work in the subbasin for the entire subbasin. I think his model has gotten better. The west side was always a little bit of, not as well calibrated as the east side. They did a lot of work initially on the east side because of the Frank Kern Canal issue. So I think the west side is getting better, but there's still work to be done. But I don't think that, I think you can trust what Tom's doing, but all outcomes are only as good as the data provided, right? And so the more data we can provide, then that's why we're doing well registry, that's why we collect pumping data information. The more data Tom has over time, the better it's all gonna get. And maybe that becomes a better value for everybody over time. Maybe it becomes a worse value. I don't know the answer to that.
As of today, though, there's been very little actual meter readings in this southeast area, right?
That's very true, yes.
So, we're just assuming that,
He has all the
Okay.
ET values. I mean,
Right.
the subbasin as a whole has all the ET.
Sure.
It's a consistent data set over this whole subbasin, right?
Right.
It's the same data set for everybody, including Delano Early Mark,
Right.
and Tom has all those. So in that respect, there is a consistent data set that's being utilized. The unknown is where each of the wells are, where their depths are, what's actually contributing to subsidence. That is kind of the black box, and
where
that's
these
why
water levels are
the
in certain
study has to be not just on Tri-County and Pixley side, but also on 2 miles in on Delano Early Mark side.
Mhm.
And my contention is we need to know where those wells are, and I know Tom was saying earlier that that's gonna make the study take longer. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
I mean, it's our livelihood.
That's right,
Yeah.
right, and I think the position is, my landowners are likely not to, lack of a better word, trust the study if it's not a complete study.
Right.
Mhm.
So, put the onus back on Delano Early Mark. If you really want this study, if you really want to prove that your pipeline's being affected, then get your wells registered in that 2 mile buffer zone, and we'll take a look at the actual data. That's gonna be our position, so we'll shoot for that.
So how about the fact that we're 40% farmed approximately of the gross acreage? And I'll pick on Pixley. What percent farmed are they when this thing started?
They are not in good shape either, and even though they have a better ability and a better conveyance system, can bring in water, at least in the wet years, they're still looking at taking out 35% of production out of Pixley.
But originally, were they 80% farmed?
It is a lot more than Tri-County, there's no doubt, but,
So the point I'm trying to make is, our risk factor is probably one of the lowest ones out there on a farmed acreage versus gross acreage.
in that respect, we are definitely have been in better shape than others. And it's still, with Sigma though, it's the 7 impacts, right? And we have the impact of subsidence mainly, is the main impact that we have to grapple with.
But the impact though, other than taking Delano Early Mark out of the equation, is very low.
Yeah, high-speed rail's still through there.
Yeah.
Still have to, and there's still flooding concerns even with White River that we have to.
That to me is, I don't know, I have my own opinion about that, but, that to me is an easy fix, but anyway.
I wish that was an easy fix.
I mean, if you see the river, build the dikes up, they haven't done nothing to that thing in 50 years, right?
The problem for us
And so-
really with White River is it hits the ecological preserve and then it's uncontrolled and then it hits the community of Allensburg.
But they could easily fix that to where it goes under the 43 and out to the lake bottom.
We're gonna work on that as much as possible, and we're definitely invested in working on the White River flooding issues. But it's not simple.
All right, I'm gonna let me wrap up this call for everybody, that everyone's still on there, and
Thank you, everybody.
yeah. So, key item, the October 3rd, Tri-County Board meeting has been canceled. And so there will be a meeting on November 7th. That's the next one at 1 o'clock. So that's the next board meeting. Our next meeting as an advisory committee is on the 23rd
Of October?
of October, yes.
And it's every, fourth Wednesday of the month at 10 a.m. and we'll be back at that schedule. I don't think I'll have the conflict I had before. We had a bunch of Thule meetings scheduled, but those are cleared off the board now. So every fourth, Wednesday, 10 a.m., and we're gonna be working through this policy, for the next however many months it takes to get us there, and so it's gonna be very important. I hope that I'll keep everybody in the room.
Yeah, stay engaged.
Your voices really do matter. It mattered in the first policy we made changes, we did things. We can't, I wish that I could say we can make all the changes and manage this exactly how we'd like to for the next 15 years is all we have to become sustainable left, but, we do have some constraints, and so we'll do everything we can within those constraints.
And everything you see is draft, so nothing is final.
And we'll send these slides out.
Yeah.
And if you don't receive them, you can always send us an email, and we'll get you on the email list and get them out to you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.